Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Redeeming the Time. We are on episode 36 now, and we've got a big chunk of Ezekiel this week. So, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jacob Wells. This is my dad, my co-host, Keith Eric Wells. And you never know if I'm going to throw the middle name in there. So, thank you for joining us. You can find us on all major platforms. If you want to contact the show, you can email us at redeemingthetimepod. And
excellent.
I had a draft last night for fantasy football, so I think it's just right to do some type of draft.
Okay.
For our conversation.
By the way, last episode we were talking about the
Jedi.
Greatest Jedi. I've been called a nerd by two ladies in their 70s or older. So we are definitely
We've
nerds.
Made it.
When you have a 90-year-old lady tell you are a nerd, you are a nerd. So thank you, Alavita.
We've made it. So, but we're not just going to draft sports, because I know a lot of people don't care about that.
Okay.
But we
Something
will.
that everybody would get into?
But we will draft condiments. So you'll go first. Then I'll go, so we'll do our top three.
So once we've picked them, it's off the board.
It's off the board, so I cannot pick them. So it's different.
And you're letting me go first.
Little different than, well, I already know what you're going to pick. And it's very specific.
Yeah.
You can't just have any of them.
Right.
You have to have a certain kind.
That's right. There are very few things in our household that are allowed. No. There are very few things that I require not to be generic, all right? There's really only three things that cannot be generic, and the first one is Heinz ketchup.
There is a difference. Hunt's is not.
Yeah, the closest thing to it is that gold. What's that called?
Yeah, gold. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, something like that. But you can't even find that. They've lost shelf space. Yeah, you can't have. It's got to be Coca-Cola.
Well,
and it has to
that's an obvious one because none of the other ones taste anywhere close.
And it has to be. Well, I don't even drink Coca-Cola anymore. I drink Coke Zero, but and it has to be. Campbell's soup for tomato soup. You can't just. You can't just have generic stuff like that. Anything else can be generic. I don't care.
Peanut M&Ms.
Well, nobody makes M&Ms other than
M&Ms.
Yeah. Well, Hershey tried, but they were sad. Yeah. Okay. So ketchup's off the table.
I'm gonna go mustard.
No, that's too generic. You can't just
Heinz.
There's like a broad range of mustard because
just regular old and yellow Heinz mustard.
Okay.
It's the best. It is.
Yazel's twitching right now.
Yeah.
He can't. He hates it. Mine would be Gildan's deli mustard would be number 2.
Oh my gosh.
Stuff's the best.
All right, so do sauces count?
Sure, they're condiments. If you put it on a sandwich.
Okay. Cane sauce.
Cane sauce, okay. Oh, yeah, that's pretty good.
Honestly, to go off...
You're going to switch them?
No, to go off of yours, Chick-fil-A's little packets of Heinz, I'd take that over anything. For some reason, those taste better.
It's because what you're putting on it is why.
Well, maybe.
All right, so we've got...
But I don't get ketchup. You get ketchup.
Third would be...
I don't even know what my third...
Ranch.
It's
off the table. I got the best 3.
Which one? There's only 2 acceptable answers. 2 restaurants.
I'm not even going restaurants. I would go just
Hidden Valley?
Hidden Valley or that Kin's stuff. That's pretty good.
Dewey's, Montgomery Inn.
Well, I don't go
Holy
to Montgomery
cow.
Inn.
Well, what do
they
you
make
do?
their own, huh?
Like, we got the longs with the transition. We got Allison a jar of Montgomery Inn ranch because it is so good.
Do they make it like in a jar or do?
No, we put it in a jar.
Just put it in a jar. Can we have a gallon of your ranch?
No, you can.
Okay, so what's your third?
Amount. I have no idea. Does queso count?
put it on a sandwich.
I don't ever put it on a sandwich. I'd go Chick-fil-A sauce. Chick-fil-A sauce is pretty good.
So you went Cane's and Chick-fil-A
Yeah.
sauce.
Well, that's really
Pretty generic.
like the only condiments I ever use is ketchup, mustard, and those two. I don't ever put anything else on. But I only put mustard on. I guess I put them on turkey sandwiches, but normally just hot dogs. So I don't really use condiments.
All
and
right.
you took ketchup from me, so.
There we go. What are your top three? It's probably gonna be the same thing. Our niece, she puts ketchup on everything. So if I took that from her, she wouldn't have anything to eat. So
Can't even think of other ones. We don't like the relishes and stuff like that.
A1 sauce.
Who
did I
I'm not
hear?
a big barbecue guy.
Gaffigan, I saw some little clip on him. He's like, everybody has that same bottle of A1 that's been in their refrigerator since 1989. He says, and it feels empty until you pour it out on your steak, and then the whole bottle rushes over. And I was like, yep, that's pretty much how that works.
You didn't go spicy mustard.
I went with, that's Gildan's deli mustard. That's spicy mustard. That's the best.
That's what deli.
When you
mustard
go,
means.
when you go to Germany, years and years ago, when I worked for the chemical company, they sent us there to do an experiment on their equipment. And you go into a restaurant, and there'll be like, it's sort of communal type seating. If there's 2 seats open, you sit there. It doesn't matter if that's with your family or not. And on the table, they have this German deli mustard. Every place you go, oh, it was so good. That won me over to that kind of mustard.
Really?
It's got a lot more spice to it, and it just tastes good. I don't know. They eat pork like every meal, so maybe it goes with it.
You gotta
go with it. All right.
Gotta spice it up somehow.
That was bad.
Yes.
All right, let's get going.
So we've got Ezekiel 13 through 30, and this week's reading is there's a lot of judgment being had here.
Yeah.
So.
In a lot of different ways.
Yes, and there's a lot of different pictures that.
Pictures would be the proper word. Yeah.
Pictures that are understandable to the people at that time. So. I think that was the coolest part for me. During this is the different pictures, because he's basically saying the same thing, but he's doing it in different ways. So
yeah, if you didn't pick it up by now, by the end of this, then they were completely blind to what he was saying.
So Monday we've got Ezekiel 13 through 15.
Yeah, you won't read as much this week because they are long chapters. Some of them, except 15. 15's super short, but
yeah.
So 13 we're introduced to false prophets. He was to prophesy to the false prophets that were, and once again, remember, a lot of them were saying, "Oh, peace is coming. They're going to release Jehoiachin, and we're going to get to go back." No,
Yeah, everything these prophets are saying are lies.
No, he's calling them false prophets, and he uses this analogy of what they're telling you is untempered mortar. So imagine you were building a wall and you used mortar that was flimsy, basically. It was made out of poor materials. And so then he starts talking about when they're saying peace, 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 and then all of a sudden a storm comes and hail comes on this wall that was made out of cheap materials. What's going to happen?
You're going to fall.
You're going to fall, yeah. And so their cry of peace would have the same result, is what he's telling them. Then the one thing that I thought would be was important to specify what they're talking about here.
The women with charms?
Yeah, 17 through 23 talks about how they made pillows and kerchiefs. And you're like, what in the world are they talking about there? And, so these priestesses or diviners, they were selling symbols of charms, basically for money.
Magic charms.
Yeah, what little money they could get out of it, and they're telling lies. And Ezekiel tells them of God's hatred of that. So if you're wondering what the pillows are, it sounded like something for for their clothes, they were just doing it for money and spreading lies. So, anything else in that chapter that you had?
No.
All right, 14.
Chapter 14, we have the elders again with Ezekiel, and again we have the Lord come to him and tells him to speak to these men because they had idols in their hearts, right? So they're sitting there with him, but in their hearts weren't right. So God tells Ezekiel to speak to these guys and to
calls them stumbling blocks.
Yeah, tells them to repent, turn away from their idols, and he promises that He will be their God if they do.
Yeah, it sort of sounds like they had them in their homes too, maybe hidden ones. But yeah, definitely in their hearts and in their,
Yeah.
Go ahead. Now this has something really cool in it.
Yeah. Then in verse 14, go ahead.
Yeah, so 12 through 21 here, the land had so grievously sinned against the Lord that he says there, we'll read 14. Though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they should deliver but their own souls by the righteousness, saith the Lord God. So we have here three men mentioned, and he's telling them that even if they were in the land, they could only have delivered their own souls. Their sons and their daughters, they're lost because there's just not enough. It's sort of that imagery of when Abraham's praying back and he's saying, would you destroy Sodom for if there were this many righteous people? And it draws down all the way to Lot's family of 10, and no, God says, I won't do it for that. And he's saying, even if it was just those three men, they're only going to save themselves at that point. But the cool part about it is...
Yeah. Well, there's two cool parts.
Go ahead.
The big thing is that Daniel was still alive during this time.
No, he's just in his prime during this time,
Yeah,
so, and he's known.
Yeah, his faith and leadership was so well known that God uses him as an example because everybody knew of that example.
Yeah, so he was taken captive during this first captivity. So he's only been there 15 years maybe?
Yeah.
And he's already known to such a degree by his faith and his wisdom that God's including him with the likes of Noah and Job.
Yeah.
Which once again proves that Job's a real man.
Yeah.
That's sort of cool because a lot of people think, oh, it's just poetry. No. He was a real guy.
The thing is, Noah and Job weren't even proper Israelites. They were before that time.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So the fact that they knew both of them, I guess it's in Scripture, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, these were both men, like you said, not even Jews, but they had endured the wicked time around them, and God brings them through this. But Daniel, like I say, he's a contemporary of Ezekiel.
Because you'll see with these pictures, these illustrations, he uses stuff that they understand. So if the guy is right in front of them, that's very cool.
So God repeats. He says they're going to get destroyed by famine, sword, pestilence, and noisome beasts. Actually, noisome beasts was the second one, that if you go on them in order. So those are the four things. And even if those guys were there, their kids wouldn't even be, because they were so sinful. And then he does promise a remnant of people at the end in verses 22 through 23. So that's a super cool. When I was listening, I actually listened to this one and then went back and read it. And
it's like, Daniel?
Yeah, I was like, what? Yeah, that's sort of cool.
Yeah, Noah and Job were forever ago.
They're forever, and then you got this guy. All right, the small chapter 15.
The grapevine wood. Oftentimes, the picture of a vine is used when talking about the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
So what purpose does the grapevine wood hold? Can't build anything.
You're saying grape, like plants, right?
Grapevine.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, right?
It sounded like you said great. I didn't...
Grapevine.
Yeah.
Sorry. You can't build anything with it. The forest trees can do a lot more things. They can at least build. The grapevine isn't even good to make a pin, it says. Like a pin on clothing. And it can't even hold on a vessel. So...
Yeah, it's sort of, remember like when we were in Judges with the bramble.
Yeah.
The bramble king. They make me a king over you. That type of thing. This is, very similar. It's not good for anything. It's just good.
How useful is it when it's partially burnt? You know, so
it's only good for basically fire and
to be burnt.
Kindling. So that's the comparison he's making there.
It also mentions that they will survive one calamity, but then be taken out by another, which is when they came and then left, and then
Nebuchadnezzar finally comes and
but they're going to be wiped out.
Completely chops them down and burns the city. So that's the comparison, I believe, there. So then we get to chapter 16, which is
Tuesday now.
Tuesday. Yeah, how many are in Tuesday?
16 and 17.
I was going to say, because 16 is the longest chapter in Ezekiel. You will feel like you are reading forever in this chapter. And
this one is don't read out loud.
This is the most vivid language. If you're reading this with your kids, let me encourage you to be the one that reads it, and you can paraphrase using PG language, because it's quite vivid. There's this in another chapter a little bit later on that we'll warn you on that as well.
I saw that this probably wasn't read out loud to the people. It was just the leaders.
Yeah, the rule, the Jewish rabbis would not read this one in public. It's that vivid in its language.
It's the longest chapter.
Well, I mean, it's just right out there. In verses 1 through 14, God speaks to Jerusalem, how he found them as, an unwanted child. Verse 5, back then, if a child was unwanted, this seems unbelievable in our mind today, but they would throw this, maybe a child that was deformed or a child not wanted, they'd throw that child out in the field, and they would be destroyed by animals. That's just unbelievable but that's what was going on here, and this is a comparison he makes. So God took them and cared for them and clothed them and adorned them. And in verse 8, it goes so far as then sort of a marriage relationship, how he made a covenant with them. Speaking of their covenant in Exodus 24. And then he uses similar phrasing like we saw in Ruth chapter 3, verse 9, where he spread his skirt over Ruth. Boaz spread his skirt over Ruth, and now we have God saying he spread his skirt over Israel. So this husband and wife imagery, which we've seen over and over again. And then 15 through 19.
Yeah, first verse 15 starts with but.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to.
And then we see the story play out through, like we've been reading.
Yeah,
story play out where and it goes into poetic detail here.
They trusted instead of following, you trusted in your own beauty, and you became the harlot.
Yeah.
And then we get great details on what that means.
Chasing after gods, and in verse 22, and all these abominations. And I'm not going to read it, but yeah.
You played the harlot, building high places. You've been with Egypt. You've been with Philistia. You've been with Assyria, Canaan, Chaldea. They've given you gifts, and you've taken them.
Verse 34 is tough, because it talks about how...
Yeah, explain that. I mean, because that might be a verse they don't understand.
I had to read it like 15 a lot of times. So basically, I'll read it. And the contrary is in the and the contrary is in thee from other women in thy whoredoms, whereas none followeth thee to commit whoredoms, and in that thou givest a reward, and no reward is given unto thee. Therefore thou art contrary. So with a typical harlot, they are paid for what they do, but the Israelites are paying to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
And
so the opposite of what is even meant by that is happening. I mean, that's just mind-boggling is what he's saying here. God's given them over, judgment's coming, verses 35 through 59, and in that the comparison of Samaria, which means Israel, because that was their capital city, as sister to Jerusalem, Judah. And then he says in greater sin Then Sodom. And then he mentions what the sins of Sodom were. This is an interesting thing. It mentions pride, fullness, gluttony, idleness, not idol, but idle, like
laziness.
Yeah, more than laziness. Like they had so much, they just idle time that caused. When you don't have a lot to do,
so boredom.
You usually wind up finding things to do with your time, and many times that's sinfulness, disregard for the poor and needy, their haughtiness, and then abominations, which ties in all those things that we saw with Lot that happened there. So he's saying they were doing greater sins than this. I mean, how corrupt did they get so quickly? But then at the end, he always gives a glimmer of hope. I will remember my covenant, and then he says, "I will make a new covenant with you." So that's the end of that really long chapter. But they saw what their sister had done, but yet they went even further. All right, chapter 17, the vine and the eagle.
Yeah, So the parable or the riddle of the two eagles. The first one takes the cedar seed and vine and plants it in a fertile part of it, right in a trade route. And the vine begins to grow, shoot out, and everything. But then the second eagle comes and just appears to do nothing for the vine or anything. And the vine starts shooting towards the second eagle. So the first eagle planted it, gave it a place to grow. The second eagle comes and is going toward the second eagle, and in hopes that eagle will provide for that vine. So the audience is left here thinking about this. He doesn't explain it right away. And then Ezekiel...
know ye not what these things mean, he says in verse 11.
Then he comes in and explains the situation of Zedekiah with Babylon and Egypt, and how Zedekiah made a terrible alliance with Egypt, and how he basically is going toward the second eagle, even though that the first eagle was what they were.
Yeah, so they had made a covenant, or not covenant, they had made an oath to Babylon that they would follow Babylon after being conquered. They really didn't have a choice. And then they put their hope in Egypt. Yeah, when you first start reading this, you're like, is that eagle God? Is that at first? And then no, he explains it. Yeah, so the explanation is, they'd made this with Babylon, then they put their hope in Egypt, but Egypt's not doing anything with them, for them, and he says in 16 through 21, Hezekiah will be captured and taken to Babylon. But restoration, there's a messianic promise here. You don't see a lot of that in Ezekiel, at the first part of Ezekiel. Restoration's promise, the tender one that is coming is the Messiah. The thing I found interesting in 22 through 21 was that I will. This is God that is doing this for them, so that it's not something they're doing themselves. It's something God is doing for them.
I thought that was a pretty cool illustration.
Oh, yeah.
With the two eagles.
All right.
Wednesday, Ezekiel 18 through 20.
This is an interesting, I think verse 20 is the key verse here in 18. Let me get that.
The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither shall the father bear the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him.
Right. So the verses 1 and 2, the proverb that they're saying there was a complaint that the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. So what in the world does that mean? Basically, they were complaining that
everything their fathers did is
I'm getting punished for what my fathers did, for what my parents did. And God's telling them, no one will be held accountable except for their own sin. You say I'm not fair, verse 25, but you are the one that's unequal. And he's showing them, no, this is because of your sin. And he tells them, verses 30 through 32, repent, cast away. Verse 32, for I have no pleasure in the death of him that dieth. Turn and live.
it's the throwing blame on somebody else, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're not accepting the consequences for what they're doing in their own life. Nobody wants to be held accountable for what their parents have done. I mean, we see that in America today. We've got folks that want to blame the people that are alive today for something that happened 100 years ago. Well, obviously, we weren't part of that. And he's saying, no, you've gone beyond this in your life. So that's what we see here.
That's all of 18.
All right.
Right?
Yeah, that's 18.
Chapter 19 is pretty short.
You like this chapter. This is the lion chapter. Right?
Yeah. So it talks about setting a lamentation for the princes of Egypt. And it's a pretty cool metaphor of a mother lion and her cubs. And the mother lion, or the lioness, referring to Israel or Jerusalem. And her first cub, it talks about, the first cub it's talking about is Jehoahaz, who only reigned for about a month, but learned the ways of a lion and was brutal to the people.
He was the one taken by Egypt.
Yeah. So he was taken by Egypt. Then her second cub, it's talking about Jehoiakim, or Chin, and he also learned the ways of the lion, and he was captured by. Was he captured by
Babylon?
By Babylon.
Yeah, he's the one held in captivity by
and
Babylon.
It says taken in their pit.
He was put into dungeon.
Yeah.
There.
And Judah was a vine. Blessings and fruitfulness came from this vine. But in verse 12 it says, "But she was plucked up in fury because of the sinfulness of the nation."
Yeah. They will have no strong rod after this, which is true because their kings to follow are very weak.
And the last statement is, "This is a lamentation." This is a sad chapter, but again, the picture of a mother lion, like, they knew what these things were, and it was easy for them to understand. But just like we've seen, and just like what we do, we don't. Yeah. They don't fully understand it, or they don't grasp it.
All right, Ezekiel 20, the first part of that, the elders, they come to Ezekiel, they're inquiring of the Lord, and then God rehearses basically Israel's history from Egypt to the Promised Land with all of their rejections. As I was reading this, I thought, how many times is there a recap of their history? Somebody has to have thought of that and like counted that, because I mean, there's so many times.
It's like it's in every prophet, I think.
So without a doubt, yeah. I mean, we have the deacon Stephen doing it in front of the Sanhedrin in the book of Acts.
Ezra did it, right? Ezra and Nehemiah?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, how many times, come on, guys, pick up on this. So verse 1, it tells us the date when this occurred. So it happens the 5th month, the 10th day of the month. And 7th year, 5th month, 10th day. So why is that important? So what's going on here is this is 2 years after chapters 1 and 3, and it's 1 year after chapter 8. So the different things that are going on there. And God gives them the consequences of their sin, yet still shows mercy.
Well, verse 3 it says, this is God talking to them, "Are ye come to inquire of me? As I live, saith the Lord, I will not be inquired of by you."
Right.
And then he gives the reason. He goes through the history.
Here's everything we've done. Here's what I've done for you.
And this is why, basically.
Verse 31, he says it again, "I will not be inquired of by you." Once again, he says it the second time. Talks of future judgment, and then eventually verses 33 through 44 gives restoration. At 37 is interesting. It shows God as a shepherd, and he uses this term of passing under the rod. "And I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant." So the picture here is, imagine a sheepfold, and you're letting either your sheep in or your sheep out, and you have this rod, and If it's your sheep, you lift the rod and it goes under the rod. If it's not your sheep, you put the rod down and you force that sheep to go a different direction so it can't go in to the sheepfold or out of the sheepfold. And the thought is he will be the one that will decide who remains, who's the remnant, who are the people that are true to him, that are going to follow him. He is separating the sheep, and Jeremiah 33:13 he speaks of a very similar thing. Verse 38, purge out from among you rebels, is what he says. So that's what he's going to do here. Eventually there will be just those that want to serve him. And then there's this whole end of the chapter 45 through 49, he's to face south and proclaim judgment on Judah. So that's chapter 20. Anything else in there?
I didn't catch that. That's good.
I thought that was an interesting phrase there. And you think of, Jesus the great shepherd, my sheep will know my name. He's the one that's in front of the sheepfold. Robbers try to, climb over. There's all that kind of comparison that goes in there. And it makes sense to them because that's what they did.
Yeah.
So, all right. Chapter 21.
Chapter 21, we have Thursday. We have 2 chapters here, 21 and 22. And 21 is about the judgment sword of the Lord. Very neat depiction and metaphor of a sword dealing out the judgment.
You got the sighing, too, at the beginning. He was supposed to, verses 1 through 7, he was to face Jerusalem, so look toward Jerusalem, and visibly sigh so that people would acknowledge. My sister would do that when I remember at Christmas time, when you get old enough to where you finally don't want to pop up for gifts you want to sleep in or something, and she was 6 years younger, so she would sit in front of we weren't allowed to open gifts unless we were all there, so she'd sit in front of my room and she would do. I can still remember that. And
I'm coming.
Yeah, I'll get up out of bed. And that's, he was supposed to sigh to such a point that they would acknowledge it, and he would tell them then of why are you sighing? Well, boom, and then he would go into the judgment and tell them of that, and then he talks about the sword.
Yeah, the very poetical sword talks about. I don't know what exact. It's very cool. I don't know how to fully describe it, but the sword was a weapon that was supposed to be polished, sharp, and the whole depiction of it going through the land and I don't know it. I don't have specific things, but I thought that the sword is one of the weapons that they quickly drew out. So the readiness of the judgment now is. I thought that was interesting. That metaphor there, they understood it again because the sword was the main weapon back then, and so.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else on that?
Yeah. Verse 14. Thou therefore, son of man, prophesy and smite thine hands together, and let the sword be doubled the third time. The sword of the slain, it is the sword of the great men that are slain, which entereth into their privy chambers. So what we have here is he's talking about double third time there. So Babylon had already come through 2 times, and now when he talks about this third time, there was a coming judgment. But he has allergies, by the way, if you're wondering what's going on there.
I was in the sun all day yesterday, and then I came into a cold house.
Yeah. So this third time is the eventual final judgment that's coming on them. And so they get to 18 through 23, and the Lord tells them again, he gives us an analogy of Babylon has come to a crossroads. Will they go to Judah or will they go to Ammon? Which way are they going to go? And he talks of how they were divining, the Babylonians were divining an answer where basically these arrows, sort of like drawing straws in our world. They were using images, and then talks about how they used the liver, which was this weird, mystic thing that pagans did, where they would cut open the liver and they would examine it, and some priest would tell them one way or the other. It was a pagan thing that was done there. Then in verse 27, overturn 3 times. It's mentioned there.
I will overturn it, and it shall be no more until he come whose right it is, and I will give it him.
Yeah, so once again, this is similar to the sword 3 times, overturn 3 times. This is that third one. And then it ends with judgment on Ammon that's coming. The Ammonites are going to be judged as well. There we go. Interesting chapter.
Yeah.
22.
Sorry, I'm dying over here. Sorry for sniffles, if there are sniffles for the audio listeners. I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep them.
They'll think you're in tears.
I'm trying to keep it to a minimum. Chapter 22. Here's another brutal chapter. Is this the one you were referring to?
No, chapter 23. Next chapter is going to be
22 and 23 are brutal.
Yeah.
Jerusalem is referred to the bloody city.
Yeah.
And it talks on the judgment toward that city. I have verse 13.
I mean, it literally every sin that was mentioned in Deuteronomy not to do, they are doing. He's mentioning here.
Verse 13, therefore I have smitten mine hand at thy dishonest gain, which thou hast made, and at thy blood which hast been in the midst of thee. So smitten thy hand, like he is hitting his fists toward the nation. Is that what... Did I read that correctly?
Yeah.
He's so angry, so anguished on the path that his people have chosen, that he is beating his fists at the leadership of Israel.
Yeah,
that depiction is sad, and it's just brutal.
Yeah, and then he uses some other pictures. 17, he compares them to dross. We've talked about that many times. You know, when you're purifying silver or gold, the impurities, those impurities are worth nothing. I mean, they're just waste, and that's what he compares them to.
Then you have another one with the furnace. Is that what you're referring to? Like them gathering together into the furnace and melting in God's judgment? Yeah. And
then 18 through 23, through 31, he talks about their priests and their leaders. They've conspired, they've sinned, they've oppressed, he tells them. And then we get to verse 30, the famous, and I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. So this is the man of asking someone to stand in the gap for him, but he could not find any.
Who preached that? They're famous.
A lot of people have preached that.
I think
when we were in when we were on a mission trip, Jonathan spoke of that. Yeah.
Who will stand in the gap?
Yeah. To do what only you can do.
But he found no one.
All right.
And then Friday.
Yeah, this is another PG-13 type chapter. Chapter 16. This is a very interesting chapter, and the analogy he uses here. So he compares 2 sisters, both married to God. Aholah, which is Samaria or Israel. The name means her own tabernacle, meaning she denied or she rejected God's tabernacle. So this is the northern kingdom. We see that what they've done. And Aholibah, which is Judah or Jerusalem, that means my tabernacle in her, representing that she was the home of God's temple. So that's exactly what we see here. We see the northern kingdom of Israel. They made their own tabernacle or temple, and we have Judah, where they had God's temple in Jerusalem. So verses 5 through 10, the story of Israel or Aholah, how she lusted after Assyria and after her and then her judgment that came. And then Aholibah in verses 11 through 21, saw, it tells us, she saw what her sister did. She saw the judgment that came, but did even more than her sister with Assyria and Babylon. So that's the PG version of that.
Yeah.
And then the judgment.
And they will drink the cup of her sister, the cup of judgment.
You will join your sister, he tells us in 22 through 35. 22 through 35. And then the last part of that, the sins are described and the judgment's revealed. So that's an interesting chapter. I love that comparison. That one really stuck out. You know, he's coming from different angles. This isn't all spoken in one day. These are months and months, these different. So imagine, you hear different sermons from me over different weeks, and yet I'm bringing up maybe the same type of topic each week. So it's very similar here. You know, he's presenting the same information. He's not standing in a pulpit or anything like that. But he's trying to get the leaders to understand and to listen, to follow the Lord. So 224.
And to have, and that that harlotry was never viewed as a good thing. So that depiction of these two sisters doing it and their nation doing it even more, because they obviously knew what went on with Israel too. So
you saw it, you saw their judgment, and yet you're doing even worse. So we've said this multiple times now.
Chapter 24.
Mm-hmm.
Even more judgment. Judgment coming. The parable to the rebellious nation of the boiling pot.
Yeah, in the 9th year, in the 10th month of the 10th day. That date is used multiple times. It marks the beginning of the final siege on Jerusalem. It's mentioned in 2 Kings 25, Jeremiah 39, and 52. So this was their 9/11, their Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th type thing. These are days that stick out in the history. And he gives this parable of the boiling pot. Go ahead if you want to talk about that.
You can go ahead.
Okay. So in verses 35, he's supposed to fill a pot with water, put big old chunks of meat in there, and he's supposed to boil it. But he uses the fuel to boil it of bones. And it represents Nebuchadnezzar's troops, that would feast on Jerusalem. They're just supposed to pull out the meat there. In verses 6 through 8 talks about the boiling meat and the scum on there. If you've ever cooked before boiled meat, you'll get this scum along the top of it and around the sides of it. It's sort of gross. It is gross. And he's talking here. Their sin, Jerusalem's sin, is the scum, and when the Jerusalem comes to just pull meat out indiscriminately, like they don't care if you're a priest, a leader, a normal person. When they come in to destroy the city indiscriminately, people are going to be destroyed, and judgment without God, and God's not going to repent of it at all. He does, this is the judgment that he has put on them. Then we get to 15 through 27. This is a rough one. Each of these descriptions, as you see, the word of the Lord came unto me, or the word of the Lord came unto me again. I underline those because those show you the breaks and the new comparison that God's using. And this is the one. Son of man, behold, I will take away from thee the desire of thine eyes with a stroke. Yet neither shalt thou mourn nor weep, neither shall thy tears run down. Forbear to cry, make no mourning for the dead. Bind the tire of thine head upon thee, and put on thy shoes upon thy feet, and cover not thy lips, and eat not the bread of men. So he spake, it says unto there, so I spake unto the people in the morning, and at the even my wife died, and I did in the morning as I was commanded. So this desire of thine eyes is his wife. And he's instructed here not to publicly mourn for his wife, not to cry, not to cover his lips, not, basically don't be outwardly showing emotion. So she dies, and he does as he's instructed. It's an incredibly hard thing to do, but he's told them, they ask him why, and he says, this is a picture. This is a picture of what you're going to do as well, because right now your children that are in Jerusalem, they're going to be destroyed, and I don't want you to mourn, because this is a sign from the Lord that this occurred. And when that judgment was complete, Ezekiel's tongue was, from that point on, it tells us the last verse, Ezekiel's tongue would be released to where then he could finally give them, these are the blessings that are going to come. I don't think it means he was mute at that point. I think it means he was tied to not share anything beyond the judgment until all this occurred. And it's a very sad portion of this. And his wife is taken. She's that comparison of, she's with the Lord, so she's better off, so that you don't have to be thinking of it that way. And this is the comparison that's made to the other people. That makes sense?
Yes. I was a little confused on the last part there with the
tongue loose.
Yeah, the tongue.
Yeah. And then we get into the judgment of the nations.
So now we're into Saturday, and just like we were talking about with Isaiah and Jeremiah, and mainly those two, we have this series of chapters of what's going to come of these nations, and it's very similar. But obviously it's with the Ezekiel twist.
And he gives a reason why for each of them. I think there's always the word because.
Yeah. So it starts with Ammon, and then goes to Moab, then Edom, then Philistines, and then it gets into other nations. But this chapter is on those three or four.
Four, yeah. And look for the word because, and then it'll tell you why. Because you didn't have pity on Jerusalem. Because they mocked. Because of their vengeance. That kind of thing. So then we get, so Babylon is used as a tool to take care of all of these.
Yeah, coming from the north.
Yeah. Okay, we get to chapter 26. We've got time, so I want to share something on this. The fulfillment of this. So explain Tyre and who they are and all that kind of stuff.
So I think I talked about Tyre, I don't remember when, but it's one of those things that everyone has it, where you latch on to something you find interesting, and Tyre is that for me. They were in Phoenicia, or like northwest of Israel, I guess, or just north, and they were a big port city, and they had a bunch of resources. We get the wood from there when they were building the tabernacle, or not the tabernacle, the temple. They brought their specialists, their architects and everything down. They were very wealthy because everybody wanted what they had.
Yeah, they
traded with everybody.
Yeah, they had ships, so they were trading all over the Mediterranean.
Yeah, they could go up to Greece and all that, but also with the Edom and all the nations right next to them as well. So
the water was their trade route.
Yeah.
So he comes in here and he talks about the destruction of Tyre because of, which is modern day Lebanon, because of her broken pact with Jerusalem, and they were celebrating Jerusalem's fall. And he talks about how Babylon would destroy them, and now it gives vivid details. And it shows about how 12 through 14, how there's waves of invaders that are going to come, and they're going to be brought down to the pit and gone. So here, Dr. Phillips did an incredible job, and only the way he can, of giving how, as you read through this, all these details. The story of Tyre's doom began several centuries earlier when the prophet Ezekiel pronounced the city's destruction because of its traffic in slaves and its vile, cruel religion. In foretelling Tyre's overthrow, the prophet added detail after detail. He said that the invader would first take the suburbs of the city, the daughter cities of Tyre, and then Tyre itself in verses 6 through 11. that many nations would come against the city, verse 3. That Tyre would be thrown down into the sea, verse 12. That the site of the city would be left flat and scraped as clean as a rock, verse 4. That where Tyre once had stood, fishermen would spread their nets, verse 5. And finally, for good measure, that the city known as to Ezekiel would never be rebuilt, verse 14. In Ezekiel's day, such predictions as those must have sounded ridiculous. Tyre was mistress of the seas, the seaport of the world. Even mighty Carthage, whose troops under Hannibal almost conquered Rome, were a mere colony of Tyre. Tyre enjoyed its greatest prosperity between 1100 to 573 BC. Its location enabled it to resist capture for centuries, and its walls defied even the siege-wise troops of Assyria. Tyre was the proudest and most prosperous city on earth when Ezekiel wrote, the emporium of the world. Tyre's markets bulged with gold and precious stones from Ethiopia and Arabia, silver from Spain, tin from Britain, emeralds from Damascus, ivory from the east, and wheat, honey, and oil from Palestine. By the time of Nebuchadnezzar's troops came hammering at its gates, Tyre was riding the crest of imperial might and power. Having defied the Assyrians for 5 years, the city was secure in the belief that its defenders could certainly sneer down from its walls and fortresses at the Babylonians. But Tyre's hour had come, though none of its citizenry knew it. First, Nebuchadnezzar's armies took the daughter cities of Tyre of the mainland as foretold. Then in 585 BC, he brought the full weight of arms to bear on the main prize itself. For months he battered away at the city's defense until at last he broke through, sacked the town, burned it to the ground, and left the metropolis a heap of rubble littering the landscape. The people of Tyre, however, escaped to an island lying half a mile offshore, and from there they continued to defy the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar had neither the fleet nor the resources for an amphibious assault on the new Tyre. He continued his siege for another 13 years and then gave up. Both sides acknowledged that the situation was a stalemate, and they signed a truce in 572. Tyre had won a moral victory over Nebuchadnezzar, but only part of Ezekiel's prophecy had been fulfilled. The Tyre known by the prophet was no more, and its ruins testified to the partial fulfillment of the prophecy. But it seemed it must remain just a partial fulfillment, for Nebuchadnezzar had more important matters on his mind than tossing rubble of Tyre into the sea merely to fulfill the oracles of a Hebrew prophet whose name he likely did not even know. Meanwhile, the people of the new island Tyre set about fortifying their city against further would-be conquerors. They built mighty walls 150 feet high around the coastline of their city. They minded the channel to the mainland with underwater obstacles to sink unwary enemy ships, and they built a first-class navy. For 2.5 centuries they continued to live on in security, while Ezekiel's prophecies slumbered in the womb of time. Who talks that way? Then in 332 BC, Alexander the Great, a far more brilliant tactician than Nebuchadnezzar, came hammering at the walls. The Macedonians had just won tremendous victory over the Persian army in 333. Flushed with victory, they were marching south to take Egypt. Alexander had no intention of leaving a powerful city-state like Tyre standing astride his lines of communication. And since his navy was no match for Tyre's, he decided to build a causeway from the mainland to the island. In 333 BC, that's incredible. To get the materials needed for this mammoth project, he turned to the rubble of the old Tyre, which had been left behind centuries before by Nebuchadnezzar. Before the causeway was finished, Alexander's engineers and sappers had scraped up the very dust of the ruins and thrown it into the sea. The people of the island fought back desperately to halt the building of that causeway of doom, but God's clock had struck the hour. Nothing now could prevent the Tyre's full and final fall. Alexander's men made great shields for shelter from their arrows and missiles of the foe as the mole they were building crept relentlessly on. Then his engineers built mobile towers 20 stories high with an upper platform that towered 160 feet above the ground. These towers were dragged along the causeway, and from them Alexander's troop could look right down into stricken Tyre. Drawbridges on the front of the towers enabled the Macedonians to leap at least over the massive walls to take the city. So Tyre fell, and Alexander unwittingly fulfilled Ezekiel's ancient prophecy. As the centuries came and went, drifting sand from the sea covered Alexander's causeway into a peninsula on which fishermen now spread their nets. That's incredible. The full fulfillment of that prophecy over,
hundreds of years.
Yeah, hundreds of years, but yet it came to pass. So as we look at God's prophecies and we're like, oh, that hasn't all come to pass yet. Well, look at the unique ways that each little detail of chapter 26 has come about. I thought that was worth reading. Hopefully you found that worth reading as well. So that's what we see here. And then we get into 27, which is a lamentation for this city.
So you see a little bit more of what Tyre was about here and why they were judged, because you see the constant use of the words merchant and merchandise, and you see that they were a great city in the eyes of the people, like what we just read. Like they were the most prosperous at that time, but they were a greedy people, and people wanted their goods, people wanted their resources and everything. They traded with every nation, and they were a materialism heavy city.
Yeah,
everything was materialism.
Every nation is mentioned here of the known world at that time, of how they traded with them.
And then you see the illustration of a shipwreck. So they were I thought it was cool that it was a shipwreck, because that was their main way of trading, and a shipwreck, and all of their resources and all their goods are overboard, never to be seen again. And
the pain of their lost trade.
And then they would become a horror. It says it in the last. They will be a terror. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt be any more. So they'll be wiped out.
Right. And then it ends with a future picture of the fall of Babylon the Great, as well. I'm sorry. My note didn't make sense there. This is a picture of the future fall of Babylon, like Revelation chapter 18. So we have the shipwreck, the mourning, the loss of. So you have Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation is this commerce king, the United States today. This commerce king, and some people think that's maybe who we are. And it's it was very similar pictures being shown of this. Everything's about the world, and so that's what we have at the end of Ezekiel 27.
I didn't think about that. Everyone knows the United States. Everybody knew. Tyre.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying that's it. That's just the picture that some people use. Ezekiel 28.
Ezekiel 28. Now we get to the leadership of Tyre, and it talks about the pride of Tyrus's king, and the death of Tyrus's king, and the judgment of Zidon, which is another city,
or Sion,
that was next to. It was a sister city of Tyre, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, verses 1 through 5 talks about the sins of Tyre's king. Mentions Daniel again in verse 3. So he's known for his wisdom. Then there's talks about the judgment on him. Then we get to the famous verses 11 through 19. This, if you want to, right next to that, Isaiah 14, we have the prince of Tyrus. Up to this point, it was the prince of Tyrus. Now we get to the king of Tyrus. So is this speaking of the same person? Is this possibly the spiritual ruler, as we saw in Isaiah 14, where he's the...
Is this the devil?
Is this Satan himself? This passage is used to describe and explain Satan's position and his fall. Verses 12 through 15, first part of 15, what he was the cherub that he was pre-fall, before the sin came in. And then it says there, till iniquity was found in thee. And then his iniquity is described. So I would put, if you want an explanation of what Satan did, this and Isaiah 14 give you a pretty good picture of that.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. I got to go back.
All right, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Judgment on Zidon, and then the future restoration of Israel is mentioned in that chapter. So,
then chapter 29 and 30, we get into Egypt, but we'll just focus on 29. So, like we were talking about, it's the list of judgments for each other nation. So we've already gone through the Philistines, Edom, Ammonites, and Moab. Now we get to the bigger ones that get more chapters. So we had Tyre, and now we have Egypt here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, I mean, Egypt is always viewed as flesh.
Right, it's the world.
It is always the world, and you see the judgment on them, and them being conquered by Babylon.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that shows some history that's going to occur. We just sort of read it when we were talking about Tyre. When Nebuchadnezzar's troops came to take Tyre, they're hungry, because they were the trade capital of the world. They're thinking money, 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 money. When about the troops, and when we take this city, we're going to have a lot of money from this. We're all going to have a bunch of loot that we can take home. And what happened? Tyre spent a lot of their money to get defenses, and then when they saw it was inevitable that they were going to be gone, they loaded all of their treasure onto those ships, took it out to that island. So when they finally took the city, they didn't have anything to show for it. So Nebuchadnezzar's in a situation here where his troops are starting to get a little bit upset because they don't get paid wages.
Yeah.
So God says here that they're going to go and they're going to take Egypt, and the loot that they take from Egypt will be their payment.
Huh.
So that's what's going on here. If you're
the wages for Babylon.
Yeah, the wages for of their army, verse 19 there, that's what that's talking about, and it comes to pass that way, exactly as God says. So we have the wages being paid for that, and Egypt will never, as you look through 29 and 30, Egypt will never really come to this great power ever again. We have Alexander the Great will come in a couple hundred years after this, and he will create Alexandria with no problems at all. In fact, they make him Caesar, or not Caesar. They make him Pharaoh, so he's not Egyptian. Then Ptolemy, who's one of his generals, comes in after that. Then Ptolemaic Empire comes. They have some power, but it's not Egyptian. And then Julius Caesar goes down there, and there's just basically a little puppet king at that point, and he puts, there's brother and sister, this little boy king, and Cleopatra, and she steals his heart, and the whole thing that comes about with that. So they really never rise again to the power, just as God says.
By themselves, yeah.
By themselves, right. So, what they are today is a shadow of what they were. They're not ruling nations like they did.
Because when you typically hear Egypt in the reference to the Bible, you think of this big empire.
Yeah.
And
this is the end.
Yeah. And
so that's it.
That is it. So there's a lot of judgment in this.
Yeah, we get some prophecy from this point on. After we get through the judgment of the nations, the end of the book, we're going to have some prophecies and of their future. So there's going to be some. It turns the corner, and there's some joy after this. Stick with us.
And then we got Daniel after.
Yeah.
Do we get into Daniel next week? Or are we just in Ezekiel?
I don't know. I didn't look ahead. We'll take a step back in time a little bit, not much, a couple decades back in time to get when we get to Daniel. And then he prophesies to the very end of time. So
yeah.
And
looking forward to that.
Sure.
Yeah. We get the first 3 chapters of Daniel next week. So
that's all just narrative. So get to meet Nebuchadnezzar.
All right, Dad, what do frogs get when they go through the drive-thru?
What?
French flies.
Oh, that's terrible. That was
Any guess on who that came from? I guarantee you won't get it.
a kid, I'm going to say.
Yes?
Yeah, that was...
Bennett Columba.
Oh, okay. Good
French
job.
flies, yes.
Good job, Bennett. All right.
He told me a few, but
Okay.
a few of them didn't make sense. He makes up his own jokes.
He makes his own way.
Yeah.
If he made that one, that's pretty good.
That is good.
All right. Well, you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you later. Love you. Bye.